Hi everyone, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here with a new PB&J card class. This is the second in my series of 5 videos sharing my top 5 versatile card making products from Penny Black's recent releases. And today's product that I am featuring is our Background Basic Stencil Set. So this has come out in the last year, but I find even over the course of many months now, I am reaching for this stencil set all the time. So before we go into that, I just wanted to mention what makes a product versatile to me. The first is it makes my stash, products I already have, more usable because it gives them a home, or it can make new items more likely to be used. It works for multiple seasons or occasions. It coordinates with multiple styles. It's easy to use and it has a classic look. And here is a look at what our Background Basic Stencil Set is. You get all of these stencils. The top ones are standard size card size, 4¼ by 5½. The bottom ones are 5 by 7. You also get all of the interior pieces of each of those stencils all in one set. So what I love about this is that often I just want to do some very straightforward stamping and coloring. And in the end I want to be able to put together a card that makes sense and looks finished. And this stencil set allows me to do it. So often when I have new stamps, what I will do is I will just stamp a whole bunch like I'm doing here. I like to use Memento ink in the color of Toffee Crunch for sort of a faux no line look, and then I just go ahead and paint all of the images. If there's any little details like this that I want to outline, I'm doing that with a PITT artist pen. It's a waterproof ink with a really fine extra small journaling tip. So I'll stamp them all, I'll do this outlining, and then I will just paint, and I know when I'm done I can finish them off with the stencil set. I'm using Distress Ink Reinkers used as watercolors. You can see that on my palette. I'm also going to use a little bit of this Toffee Crunch ink because I love it as a soft neutral. So I'm just pressing that ink pad onto an acrylic block. I have a water cup handy and a paper towel handy. So I'm just going to bring you through here in my process of painting one of these cards, but at the end of the video I'll show you multiple ways to use the stencil set to finish off multiple cards. So what I'm doing is I'm just putting down the ink on my paintbrush directly from the palette wherever I want the color to be darkest. Then I take my paintbrush over off to the side and rinse it off in the water, pat it on that paper towel, and then I can go back and blend out that ink. I can add multiple layers if I want, so darkening up certain sections while sort of that base layer is still wet. And I will link for you down in the YouTube description box below several things. All of the colors that I'm using to do my painting today on camera, all of the supplies I'm using, my paintbrush, the inks, the paper, everything, including all of the Penny Black products are listed and linked for you down below. I'm also going to link for you a video where I go in detail on my painting process. It even has some real-time painting for you to see. So if you haven't seen that yet, or if you have any more questions about how I like to paint, I will link that video for you down in the YouTube description box below. But I'm just going to continue to follow this process. If there's little areas I want to darken up, I can always go back and add it. Or if there's an area that I've gotten too much ink, I will go in with a brush that has just been patted dry on the paper towel, a thirsty brush, and sort of lift color. And you can do that if your color is still wet. Now here I'm grabbing that Toffee Crunch ink that was pressed onto the acrylic block. As you can see, that is just a really nice shadow color. Often I find with sort of light colors like this, they'll be a little too yellow, but that Toffee Crunch for me is just like magic for stamping and even for painting a little bit. So I wanted these flowers to have white petals, but not look like I forgot to paint them. So I'm just adding just a little bit of shadowing on there, sort of putting the darker color where one petal would be sort of going behind another petal. So Penny Black in their new Scent of Spring collection has tons of gorgeous, gorgeous stamps. And what I love about having this stencil set again is that it gives a home, it gives me a way to use those without having to think too hard. But I can go in, be motivated to paint and use the new stamps get them inked up. Once I've done this, made a card like this once, I'm much more likely to continue reaching for that stamp even in other designs once I have stamped and painted it one time. But with the stencil set, as you'll see later in the video, I can always find a way to finish these. These often end up being some of my most favorite cards. They're all typically one layer, so they're very easy to mail. Now this card here is a standard size card, 4¼ by 5½ inches. Most of the other cards that I'll be showing you are 5 by 7, but I'm showing you with this particular stamp, even though it's a larger stamp, it can be used on either a 5 by 7, I'll show you it on a 5 by 7 card, or a standard size card, a 4¼ by 5½ inch. So a large stamp does not mean you have to do a large card with it, but what it does mean is that because the image is larger, it can have more of an impact on your card. It can be the main thing on your card. Also, that open area within the petals, because it is bigger, gives you more room to shade and color and add life with your color, because everything isn't so tight and the lines of the stamp don't become sort of really tight together and you see a lot of black or whatever color you stamp it in. In this, as you can see, because it's larger and it's stamped, there's lots of open area within those petals, and I think that is really delightful to color and paint, and also really pretty once the card is finished. So I'll show you here, I've done the leaves. I've done those with some Evergreen Bough and Forest Moss Distress Ink Reinkers, my favorite color combination for leaves. And here I'm going in on these petals wherever I want it to be darkest. I have the concentrated color on my brush straight from the palette. I'm putting that color down where I want it to be the darkest. I'll rinse it off, pat it dry, and go back in and just blend along that edge so it goes then from dark to light. So wherever I left off on that edge is where I'm blending it out. I can go back in and darken up certain areas. You will notice I typically don't work on petals that are touching each other right away, or if I do, like I'm doing here, I will leave a little bit of white along the edge. That way the petals don't start bleeding into each other. Also, that little bit of white along the edge, as you can see there, does give some life and some movement to the petals. So don't be afraid to leave a little bit of white on your flowers as you paint them. So I've done all of that with a picked raspberry Distress Ink Reinker used as watercolor, and now I'm just grabbing a little bit of dried marigold and just in some of those lighter places, just dropping in a little bit of that color. My paintbrush is not too wet, it's just a little bit of that color, and I love how that mixes in with that pink a little bit. Now for really small details, often what I'll do instead of shading each one, I'll do just a few light and a few dark. And so on these little flowers here, some of them are getting a more watered down reinker, and some are going to get it straight from the palette like this, and you can see it's much darker. So same color, some are dark, some are light, no complicated shading for those little tiny flowers. And I think that's just enough variation to keep it interesting and finished looking. Now, you certainly don't have to paint all of these type of stamps. You could use Copic markers, colored pencils, or if you want to just do a very simple wash of color, the illustration is so beautiful. It will look really nice. What I recommend is if you're just doing like just one pink for the flowers or one yellow for the flowers, is stamp it in a little bit darker ink, and then those outlines will help do some of that work for you in giving the image some life. So here I'm going to get that watering can using Weathered Wood Distress Ink Reinker used as watercolor, putting it down where I want it to be the darkest, and then painting out from that edge. This is giving a fairly flat wash of color just because I'm just coloring it in. And then I can go in with more concentrated right from the palette. That will give you the darker color. But really on this card, the flowers are the star of the show, so nothing too fancy is needed on the watering can. Just darkening up a few areas as I go. So like I showed at the beginning, and I've mentioned this in lots of videos I've done in the past, I love to work assembly line style. So I actually had a stack of a bunch of new images stamped onto watercolor paper with the same Memento Toffee Crunch ink, and then I just had those ready to go whenever I had a moment that I could paint. I could sit down and just paint. So I just had my paint sitting out with my stack of images that were pre-stamped. It's a really fun way to make sure that you can get to things and just work in stages. So after I had done all my stamping, this is what I had. So this is just showing you that difference, that same image on a standard size card or a 5x7 card. And then the rest of these are 5x7. So this is what I have. I've just painted. You can see I haven't even done anything too creative with the placement of the images. Most of them are just stamped right in the center of the card. Sometimes I'll go off to the side a little bit, but most of these just right in the center and painted. And here is where that really versatile background basics stencil set comes in to finish things off. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place my stencil over my card, and I'm going to use a little bit of painter's tape to hold it in place. And I'm going to use some Memento Toffee Crunch ink on an ink blending tool and a foam pad. Start off of the edge and work my way on in a circular motion, mostly just in the areas where there is no stamped image. So just doing a little bit of inking on here. I'm also sure that everything is very completely dry, so I don't sort of smudge any of the painting. And once I remove the stencil, now this has just taken this to a finished looking card. And you can do this with these stencils with any type of image. Again, that's what makes it so versatile. You could be doing this for Christmas cards, floral cards, autumn cards. There's just no limit to how you can do this. So here are even more cards, and I'll show you how I use the stencils with them. Here is that same image on the 5x7, and I'm going to do a little bit of colored inking on the background. Now, all of the colors I'm using are listed down in that YouTube description box below, along with all of those products that are being used on all of the cards, the colors, and the penny black products. So everything's listed for you down below. So I put some blue up at the top and then back to the Toffee Crunch down here at the bottom. I'm getting mostly just the corners, areas where there is no stamping. And then I'll remove that stencil, and again, look, that just completely finishes the card. All that I did is stamp my sentiment, and that card is complete. Also fun with these floral stamps, by changing around what colors you use, you could give them all new life. So you could stamp just one stamp several times and paint it different colors and finish it with different stenciling. Now here is another one. I've got that truck sort of near the bottom. I'm going to hold that stencil in place just using some painter's tape that's easy to peel up. And I'm using some Toffee Crunch ink up at the top. I'm going to darken the corners a little bit more by applying heavier pressure and going over it more than once. Again, you see I just did the top part of the stencil because my image is taking up the bottom portion of that. But that will finish things off. It gives a home for a sentiment. This one I combined a die cut sentiment with a stamp sentiment. This is from our Note Edger and Note Builder set. So again, if you wanted to follow a sketch, you could do all your stamping near the bottom of your card and create several cards with this stencil set and that die cut set. Now here I'm using a rectangular stencil with a circular image, and I'm going to ink it with some colored ink. And so I'm using that shaded lilac on the left sides along with a little bit of Seedless preserves. So once I turn this around, it will be the left side of the card. Putting a little bit of Toffee Crunch over the top of that, and then just Toffee Crunch on the right hand side. And I'm just focusing mostly on those corners, a little bit in between there where there wasn't any stamping. And I love this part when you remove the stencil and that reveal, because it's just such a simple thing, and then the card looks so great. And I love this because then there's a perfect spot for the sentiment right on the inside of that. Now we also have all of these cards shown individually on our blog. So I'll link that post for you below. So if you see a card you love and you want to know exactly what stamp or die was used on it, you can find it there and they will be listed for you down below. Now included in just that one stencil set that I'm featuring on these cards, the background basic stencil set, there's also circular stencils. So same concept, but just a little bit different look. I'm putting down some ink along the top. Here I'm using some colored ink and then a little bit of Toffee Crunch ink over the top. I love the look that that gives. Focusing mainly up at the top, but just a little bit of that Toffee Crunch down here at the bottom, avoiding the main parts of the image. And again, here will be that reveal. Oh, I decided to put a little bit more. And all that is needed there is to add the sentiment, which I added, and I added a couple of pearls. So there's little things you could add, little butterflies or little pearls if you want to just add a little bit more to the card to finish it off. You certainly can. But again, I love how that circle just gives that a whole different look. Now here I'm using one of the 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch size stencils on a 5 by 7 card. I really felt like this design looks so nice with this particular stamp. So there's no reason why you can't do that. I've just put it down with a little bit of painter's tape, and then I'm just using some sticky notes to make sure that when I put the ink down it doesn't go where I don't want it to go. So it just kind of masks that off a little bit. And then I will add that Distress Ink Reinker onto the corners where there isn't a lot of stamping going on, but I do still want to see that grid as much as possible. So like on that bottom right hand corner, I did try to go around the entire rectangle. And that leaves the perfect spot to add a sentiment. So I'm just going back, darkening up the corners just to balance everything. And I will take all of these little pieces off. I keep just a stack of sticky notes like that so that I don't toss them. I just go back and reuse them. And I'll peel that up and look at that. Just really fun. And again, that one open corner is a great place to add a sentiment. So we have another design. Now this uses one of the sort of negative pieces. So remember, for every stencil you also get the interior pieces. I'm just using some painter's tape and I'm going to put that over the top of my image. I do dab that painter's tape on my sweater when I do this just so it removes some of the stickiness on there. And here I'm going to apply my ink around the outside. So this is just another way that you can use these, more versatility, a totally different look using the same set of stencils. And I'll remove that, and then it kind of spotlights that birdhouse in there. And I finished it off with a sentiment and some die cut butterflies. So let's take one more look at all the cards that were created. These were using Penny Black's Scent of Spring new stamps, but along with that top 5 versatile card making product, the background basic stencil set to finish all of these off. See different stencil designs and just a few little embellishments that are added, like the pearl there on that ribbon, which is part of the stamp design. A few pearls on here. You also could do your stamping and your painting and your stenciling and just wait on your sentiments. So you would have a stash of cards that all they need is a sentiment so that you could personalize them whenever you needed a certain type of card. That's one thing that's great about these stamps, is that they really can be used for many different occasions. Here's that one with the die cut on the top and a couple of butterflies. I thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know if you've ever used this background basic stencil set, or if you're thinking you would really like it. Leave us a comment down below, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, as well as our Instagram, website, and blog. And be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next in this video series. Happy stamping!